Good morning or good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Cisco Support Community Expert Series webcast. We're glad to have you with us. A few housekeeping notes to begin. As you enter the WebEx console, you either joined us by audio broadcast or by phone, which was automatically muted. You will remain muted throughout the event. When you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the WebEx Q&A panel as you think of them. You can find the Q&A panel in the bottom right-hand corner of the console. Please use the WebEx chat window for communication to the WebEx facilitator for any problems or issues you may be experiencing today. We would also appreciate your input regarding today's webcast. A survey will appear when you close your browser at the end of the event. So at this time, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today, Dan Gerson. Dan?
Thank you. Hello and welcome everyone to the Cisco Support Community. Today we present a live Cisco Support Community Expert Series webcast. Our topic today is troubleshooting Cisco Unified Communication Manager integration with Cisco TelePresence Video Communications Server. My name is Dan Gerson, and I'll be moderating today's event. Our expert joining me today is Mahesh Anjan. Mahesh is a product manager in the Collaboration and Communications Group here at Cisco. He's an expert in deployment of video communication services, enterprise video solutions, and other telepresence products, as well as unified communications. Welcome, Mahesh.
Thank you.
Our expert panelists today are Viraj Raut and Alan Ford. They will help in answering some of your technical questions during this event. Now I'd like to briefly outline the format for today's Expert Series event. Our expert will start with a presentation on troubleshooting Cisco Unified Communication Manager integration with Cisco TelePresence Video Communications Server for the first hour of the program. Then we'll dive into the live question submission from the audience for the remainder of the event. During our live presentation, you may submit your technical questions to be answered by our presenter and the expert panelists using the Q&A box on the right side of your console. The team of experts is well versed in Cisco UCM and VCS, so please begin posting your questions now to give us the best chance of answering them. If you experience any technical issues, please post those questions into the chat. We'll be asking polling questions today during the webcast, and we do encourage you to participate by answering them. You may also download a copy of today's PDF presentation using the link in the chat window. Let's kick things off today with our first polling question. What is your level of experience with UCM and VCS call control? Is it A, I know basic video, but no idea about UCM or VCS? B, I theoretically know about UCM, VCS, but I don't have any practical experience? C, I'm playing with it in the lab? D, I'm running it in production? Go ahead and take a moment to answer the polling question. And while you're doing that, I just want to remind everyone that everyone who joins today's webcast will receive 125 Cisco Preferred Access points. Don't forget you can submit your question for our team of experts at any time during the webcast, so no need to wait for the last minute. Don't be shy. We'll collect those questions, and certain ones will be saved for the end for our Q&A session. Okay, now I think it's time to hand the mic to our expert, Mahesh, who will begin today's presentation.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Hello, everyone. My name is Mahesh Anjan, and Dan has already mentioned I'm a product manager for UC Solutions here in Collaboration Technology Group. So today I'll be going over some of the common troubleshooting methodologies that you can use for while integrating with the UCM and the VCS. So let's dive into the session. Some of the questions you can ask, I'll try to answer at the end of the session. I'll defer later in the session, and Alan and Viraj will be helping out with some of the questions as well. So feel free to shoot the questions. And some of the questions, if there is outside the scope, please post it on the Ask the Expert event, and I will try to respond back. Okay, so what's really the objective of this session? So the call manager and the VCS are two call control agents, and when we bridge that during the call, during the SIP trunks, we encounter some of the normal integration issues. So my session will go into some of the case studies we have dealt in the past and how quickly you will be able to resolve them. So that's and take appropriate steps to resolve them. So here is a quick agenda that I'll be going on. So we will explore into one of the deployment overview. This would be a typical deployment. It's not necessarily so one of the enterprise, but it's typically like 80% of 90%. It might have a resemblance. So because some of the case studies kind of revolve around this deployment, I want to first give you guys a snapshot of it, and then it kind of makes you easy to digest some of the troubleshooting cases. We will go to the UC Manager integration with Cisco TelePresence VCS. The session layer bandwidth that we did quite a bit of enhancement with 8.6 call manager and upper. We'll talk about what is exactly the BFCP that was launched with UCM 8.6 and above, and the native interoperability, how the CTS, the Cisco TelePresence codec, how it able to call directly between other lower video endpoints. We'll go into another topic, how do you integrate the MCU with the call manager, and we'll see if there are any of good troubleshooting tips that you can actually use them. Finally, we'll end with a summary. I'd also like to add to this agenda is there is an appendix section. It's really useful. There are a lot of case studies that I would not be able to cover in this session that I put in the appendix. So feel free to go and through the appendix. There is a abundant number of call flows that I've also illustrated. Let's move on. So my baseline version today would be UCM Manager 8.6 and higher. 9.0 is there, so it holds true. X7.0 version with a VCS. MCU would be a 4.2 plus. Unity connection, you can have like 8.6. iOS is 15.1.4. Any version higher than this. So you can refer to some of this baseline software version that I've used in my case studies. Abbreviations that I'll be commonly referring to as some of the abbreviations most of the folks might be knowing here, because since it's advanced troubleshooting session, I expect some of you folks might be heard about some of these abbreviations. So I'll just pause for a second so that you can take a look at it. Okay. So as I explained, I'll start off with a fundamental deployment overview that integrates with the call manager and the VCS. So how some of my case studies kind of revolve in this particular scenario setup. So just to give an idea about how this kind of tied together, we have a call manager, we have most of the Cisco endpoints, CTS, EX90, we have E20, C20, they're all registered as a SIP. We have ad hoc conference bridge that's registered to the UCM as ad hoc conference. We have the VCS, and we have some of the third-party endpoints. We have the EX90, then 3-to-3 endpoints. We have MCU also hanging off the VCS here, and we have an MXP that's registered as a 3-to-3 or a SIP. We have a gatekeeper here. So the gatekeeper is typically in a deployments where a 3-to-3 gatekeeper is kind of deployed here. We have the earlier what we used a methodology like a RAS aggregator trunk, and there was previously we have also in the past releases we also have some of the 3-to-3 endpoints hanging off the gatekeeper here, and you can also possibly possibly do a 2 to 5 integration to the VCS. But the main objective of this session would be covering most of the SIP concepts, and the fact that I'm mentioning here with a delayed offer is something that we'll be focusing a lot. Okay, so once we go into our troubleshooting, the first and foremost is what are we going to do with the troubleshooting. The first stop is you want to know how you collect the logs from various components, some of the endpoints and the UC manager. So diagnosing some of the VCS issue, what are the typical methods that you deploy to collect these logs? So in a 7.0 version and higher, we have introduced a new feature called diagnostic logging, where you can go through web interface and you can set to the debug level and collect all the logs from the GUI itself. People have might have got into the box and have collected, but this is one of the cool features that we put in 7.0 version. These are other methods to how you can get the logs, like serial console, SSH, and also a TCP dump. That requires you to getting into the box and running these commands. This is some of other diagnostics that you can collect by enabling the root access and how you typically collect the logs from the endpoints. We dealt in the earlier slide how you collect the logs from the VCS, but there can be some issues that are very endpoint specific. So some of the good things that you can be using on a daily basis is you can get a SIP logs from the EX90 or a C series, like logging SSH into the endpoints, and you can collect by using a log CTX SIP packet debug 9. It pretty much throws the SIP logs of what's happening with the endpoint. So this is something like commonly used in the scenarios where you have to extract the logs from the endpoint. One of the other good methods is to also collect the TCP dump from the endpoints, which you can use this via the CLI. This is another screenshot. This is very specific to the E20 because some of the things that that's not there on the EX90, where you cannot where people sort of log into the E20 and collect the logs, and some of them also collect from the web interface. So these are the various methods exclusively meant to collect debugs from E20. So please take a look at this slide when it's posted, and it can be a pretty useful information. So I also want to just touch on the UC Manager. UC Manager, as you folks might be knowing, the UC Manager, the typical way is used to collect from the UCM serviceability page, ensure that you have a debug trace level set to detailed, and ensure that you have enabled SIP stack trace and a SIP call processing trace. That it's very critical for you to log all the call records and the SIP logs in the STL messages. You can also collect via the common methods that people use. It's through the RTMT tool that comes with the call manager. You can collect the logs via the call manager. So I just want to touch upon like what are the ways to collect from the VCS call control, from the endpoints, and as well as the UC manager. Moving on, you can also get SSH into the UCM and collect via the new means. We have enabled something called as a network capture via the admin utilities. So this is also one of the methods. It can collect directly to the format where you can actually open using a Wireshark. Okay, so let's dive into some of the case studies here. The case studies I'm talking is sort of centered around my deployment overview I've earlier illustrated. So the fact that I want to get into the case studies is you want to know what could be possible causes. There can be a lot of causes that the issues that's going on in this particular call flow, but I want to highlight so that you kind of get exposure to how to start troubleshooting when something happens like a 9971 calls 820. There can be many more complex scenario, but this is something fundamental that you can quickly go and search in the trace or quickly go and see in the VCS what's going on. Since we are exclusively talking about UCM and VCS integration, so it pretty much makes me like to say the link, what's happening with this SIP trunk failure. So that's why I thought, okay, this is the first thing that people should know what happens with this link, that if it gets broken between UCM and VCS. So the case study is here. 9971 calls a VCS endpoint with the E20 on the VCS, and I get a 503 service unavailable or a 408 request timeout. So you keep wondering what's going on, and let's see how to troubleshoot this. So I'll give a clue of what's going on. So you extract the STL logs, you get a sniffer trace, and you happen to say, oh, I'm getting a 503 service unavailable, or I'm getting a 408 request timeout. So what could be a root cause? So instantly you should know, oh, something is going on with the link, and it could be a possible SIP trunk failure. So how do you troubleshoot a SIP trunk failure? Let's see, how do you troubleshoot it? So when you create a zone from the VCS to the UCM, there is a peering that happens between a call manager to the VCS. So here in my case, in my lab, I had a link going to the 21.11, and you can see at the 5060 port, the link is active. So you can instantly know from the VCS endpoint, oh, the link is up. So what could be the problem? So if you are more of a UCM kind of guy and want to troubleshoot from the VCS STL logs, okay, you have an option to also look in there. If you go into the UCM logs, you can see one of the alarm here called SIP trunk OOS alarm in the STI traces. And this is a snapshot of the STI traces. I just put it here so that you can see clearly that what gets logged into the traces. It says all remote peers are out of service and unable to handle the calls to the SIP trunk. So this is one of the things that you will be able to see in the STI. Another option is ensure that you have a SIP options ping enabled under the call manager. This is very critical because you will not be able to see that a particular snapshot of the STI trace if you don't have this enable options ping. This is under the SIP profile under the call manager. Okay, now let's move on to the next piece. What can I look when the call is active and I see, oh, I'm getting a UCM sending a cost code of 41, and you're more into like a packet capture, and you see there is a cost code of 41. You can pretty much say that the trunk has been reset or something went wrong with the network, and the call manager in those cases will send a buy message with a cost code of 41. So 10.4.21.11 is my UCM IP, 2175 is my VCS IP. Okay. So moving on, the option ping. So if you are into the packet capture, you should be able to see what's going on between this VCS and UCM. You can see that there is an option ping that goes back and forth between the call manager. If the link is failed, then you will not be seeing a 200 OK going from the VCS. So in this case, there is an options that request options coming from the VCS to the call manager, and if you can see, the call manager is sending back 200 OK. That means you can also infer the trunk is up and active. So these are some of the things that you can keep in mind while troubleshooting the trunk failure. There can be many more things that you would be able to see from the trace, but I want to just give an exposure to what really would go wrong. Okay, moving on. My next case study here I want to show is I'm calling from a 323 endpoints of the gatekeeper, and to a E20 on the VCS side, and I'm getting a one-way video, and there is a two-way audio. What's going wrong here? I collect the logs, I collect the UCM, STI, STL logs, and I collect the sniffer from the UCM switch port. So you can see from here there is an audio, there is no video, and it's a delayed offer SIP trunk. And on the E20, you see there is no the display says that there is no incoming video. So let's see what's going on. So I wanted to go through the traces, and then you can actually sort of troubleshoot that. Let's debug the trace. Now, when the Sony endpoint calls, so there is an invite from the UCM that goes to the VCS. And there is a 200 OK that comes from the VCS to the UCM. So if you can see, this is a packet capture that was taken on the wire from the VCS. You can see that there is a 200 OK that's coming from VCS to UCM with a payload of 97. So this is a normal payload that would go with a 264. If you folks remember, that's the commonly adopted payload type. Okay, so we saw this 200. Okay, so still not clear why it's one-way video. So let's see what happens with the UCM ACK. The UCM acts back to the VCS with a 105 payload for a 264 MIME type. So this is not adopting something to the payload that VCS has actually sent in 200. Okay, so it's coming with a different payload now, and you can see is the 105 is mapping to the 264, and there is a payload negotiation issue. So that's why I used but you can see there is a G722 audio that got negotiated, but there is a problem with the video here. So you will be able to see just a one-way video. So the root cause I've explained, I think you folks might be knowing by now, is there is a dynamic payload negotiation issue. So this is how it's not only these cases, you can also sort of in other cases also you might encounter. So keep an eye on what's the exact payload negotiation that happens, and that could actually help you solve the one-way video issues. Or one-way video issue can be a lot more reasons, but this would be a good catch. So what is the solution that you want to overcome now? So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to remove my Sony PCS, that is the Sony endpoint, which is registered to 323 of Gatekeeper. Then I'll try to put the same Sony endpoint off of VCS now, and I still register as a 323 endpoint. So, but I break the link of a Gatekeeper here, and I'm going to the PCS, to the VCS. So let's see if I'm able to achieve a two-way video and a two-way audio. Now, my Sony is hanging off a VCS. So what are the things that it alleviated? I just have to point my Sony PCS endpoint to the VCS IP. I don't have to do any configuration, just like how you did on the call manager, creating a 323 client. I just point it to the VCS. There you go. It gets registered. So transition of H32 devices between the Gatekeeper to the VCS. So I'm also bringing another thing to a picture here. So you don't have to have a complex setup with a UCM. All you have to do is point to the VCS. VCS has a capability to do H323/SIP interworking, and it eliminates the complex RAS aggregator step, which people have been used in the past. And VCS will handle a 323 registration, and also it handles the CAC. So these are some of the advantages, but I'm just trying to demonstrate how this endpoint register and what are the pain points you can actually alleviate moving this Sony endpoint. So now let's see whether I can call from this Sony endpoint back to the 9971 or registered on the UC manager and see if I eliminated any of the dynamic payload negotiation issue. So a Sony PCS calls 9971, the invite goes out from a VCS to UCM. You can see that my call manager in a 200 OK responded back with a payload of 97. If you see, this is the critical piece. The VCS acts back to the UCM with a payload back to the 97, which had already the UCM has already put in that in its first invite. So there is no payload mismatch here. They acknowledge back and forth with a payload of 97, and they're good with a payload, and also the RTP path which gets negotiated on the G722. So you have a two-way video established, and you kind of overcame the issue of one-way video, moving your 323 endpoint off to the VCS. Okay, so my next session is something, so just pausing. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send to the Dan, and I'll answer your question at the end. If so, the next topic is a session layer bandwidth. I want to give you a heads up of some of the major enhancements that went into the UCM and why it's very critical that this bandwidth will come into play for some of the integration issues, and it's also very critical when the video comes into picture. So I want to give a little bit understanding of some of the bandwidth, the common bandwidth attributes that we typically keep talking about this, and people say, what is this? Or TIS, application specific, and conference total. So these are some of the industry-wide parameters that they have adopted. Earlier, some folks from some of the UC vendors, they might have adopted TIS, some adopted AS, and it is the B is equal to conference total. So these are different methodologies actually people might have adopted. So when I get into some of the specifics, so I want you guys to have an understanding, oh these are something bandwidth attributes. So you can refer to it and you can read into it what exactly it says. But when I get into the case studies, I think you will come to know why I'm actually referring to those. A quick comparison: what we did with a pre 8.6 call manager and what is there with 8.6 and higher version, and what exactly the impact. So you might understand why is it really necessary. So TIS is always expressed in bandwidth per second. It was pre 8.6, we processed at a session level. A call manager did a good amount of processing, but it was always a pass through at a media level. And we started supporting full-fledged with 8.6. So the impact of not processing this is the video quality would drop as low as 300K or like 30 FPS. We will get into a little more depth into it, but I just want to understand the impact of not processing as against to processing these parameters. In 8.6, we ignored, we did not do anything about AS, and the conference total we actually ignored. But starting from 8.6 and higher, we started all this processing this parameter. So because some of the endpoints wanted to know what is actually this AS and CT, why it needs to be considered. So my case study actually will sort of illustrate very good what happened with 8.5 and 8.6 higher. So let's get into one of the case study here. So there are two scenarios. One is I'm having a 8.5 call manager and calling from a E20 to the 9971, and I'm having a second scenario where I'm calling from E20 with a UCM 8.6 version. You can have 9.0 as well, which is also released, but my baseline is 8.6, and calling to the 9971. So let's see how really this bandwidth attributes play an important role here. My key thing is, as you know, there is a region bandwidth on the UCM manager, which I actually set to 384 kbps. Let's take that instance. So E20 calls a 9971, so these are some of my IPs. So the initial offer comes from E20 to UCM, and it is telling I can do my bandwidth at a AS, like application specific. It says I'm at 1152 kbps. It said on the audio M line, it says I can do a TIS, the audio bandwidth to be 64 kbps, and then on the video line, so you got to understand there is TIS on both the video as well as the audio. So it says, hey, I can do a video bandwidth at 1152 kbps. So this is the initial offering. So this is the initial offering that a UCM has set to the endpoint has set to the UCM. Now let's see in the 8.5 what actually happened. So there is a 200 OK coming from a UCM back to the E20. So I told UCM did not process earlier in a 8.5. So what would be a typical answer back to the E20? If you see at the STP level, there is no AS parameter because we ignored that. And there is no TIS at the audio line. But what we did on the TIS at the video line is we deducted the bandwidth like 384 because we set the region to 384, and it's detecting 64 kbps of audio. So we send back saying at the video M line saying, hey, I can offer you 320 because my region is capped at 384 kbps. So this was a typical offer back to the endpoint between 8.5 days. So now let's see what are the consequences of this one. The consequences of replying back like without a yes, without a TS to the E20 is E20 is there and it's sitting and it got this 320 kbps, but this is a screenshot that was taken from a E20. If you see the channel rate is really important when it comes to how the call quality or the video quality shows up between the calling between E20 and 9971. The transmit and the receive, they're significantly lowered here. Because UCM never instructed, hey, you need to adapt to this bandwidth. And it never got an instruction via the thing that it has to understand. It's like, hey, I didn't receive what's there in the ears, so it kind of fluctuates. It can go all the way to like, in my case, it went all the way to 43 kbps, the transmit, and the receive is like 17 kbps. And you can pretty much understand at this channel rate, you'll have like really a black screen or you'll have a video degradation. So that's one of the downsides of not processing. So let's see how how in 8.6 we came around this problem of addressing that. So the same scenario, same setup. We put the bandwidth to 384 kbps, and with the E20, the initial E20, the initial invite from E20 came to UCM. It's the same thing what we had. Now this is very critical. Let's see how the UCM actually offers it a 200 OK back to the UCM to the E20. Now if you see that, we started processing the AS, we started processing a TIS, and we also did the TIS at the video M line, which was also evident in the previous screenshot. But these two are very critical. We send back what a E20 would be able to acknowledge via the application specific. This is at the session level, and at each and individual audio and M line, we detected, we told this is the bandwidth that it needs to adapt. So what is the how does the video quality drastically improve? If you see the call rate here, it's set to 384 kbps, which was set to a bandwidth, region bandwidth, and if you see the channel rate is kind of very near to my video M-line bandwidth, like a 320 kbps was something that we gave back to the endpoint. See here, the channel rate is adapting to that, somewhere around that. So it is a significant increase in the video quality. That means you're telling to the endpoint, this is how much you have a bandwidth, and the E20 kind of adheres to that. It says, oh, okay, I have a bandwidth, and it got that bandwidth through that application specific that it can understand. So one of the improvement that we noticed is the E20 had a better video quality. So this is one of the things that we have improved in 8.6 and higher, and that's why the bandwidth attributes come into really very important when it's processing, especially for the video call. I just want to give go through this slide. I want to say what is typically UCM manager offer and answer behavior in a typical situations like, hey, I have one UC vendor that's offering yes, hey, it's not offering yes, he's offering only CT, and what are the different things that we actually embedded in our logic. So if a region bandwidth is set to 512, when the caller offers this particular 384, how would be the answer? So you can go through this particular slide. It's pretty good to understand. And I also want to just tell you one thing. When it comes to UC manager offer and answer behavior in the bandwidth, it's always the receive capabilities that the UCM will offer to other endpoints, saying that, hey, this guy is capable of doing. So please don't confuse. It is to the send. What is sending, it might not get that. It's always the other end. Other end is saying, yeah, I can have only 384. That is how the UCM will answer back. So this is very important, so please bear that. The next question I have is the polling question. Dan?
Sure, okay. Next polling question. What is the level of experience with SIP, H323, and BFCP protocols? Is it A, I know SIP, H323, but not BFCP? B, I theoretically know SIP and H323, but not BFCP? C, I recently got introduced to BFCP? Or D, I don't have protocol knowledge? Take a moment to answer. Okay, Mahesh, back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I asked the polling question because when I go into the next session, I want you to understand what is this word that I'm talking about. So I just wanted to get comfortable when I'm speaking about this BFCP. BFCP is nothing but it's called a binary flow control protocol. Why is it very important? This is very important because when you deal with video endpoints and when you at the same time when you start sharing, this is the protocol that comes into play. So there are something at the RFC level, you can go read on the BFC RFC. There is something called as a floor and there is something called as a server who takes the, it is just similar to how you guys have dealt with the 3-to-3. It's a master-slave determination. I hope you remember those. It is just exactly like this. So one actually takes the a stage of the client and one takes the stage of the server. So there is a negotiation that happens via this protocol. So I just wanted to give an how does it really, from the M line of the STP, how does it really play out? So a typical call from a EX90 on the UCM to the EX90 on the same UCM cluster or a different UCM cluster, how does this BFCP will come into play? So there is an audio M line that you are all familiar with. There is an video M line because that's a channel where the video goes between the two endpoints, and you can clearly distinguish. It's called in the media attribute. It says content/main. So that means it says it's a main video channel. So when you're dealing with the BFCP, you will also see one of the other media description. It's called, this is how you will see that in the STP, media description application 5070 UDP/BFCP. And there will be also a video line. And you might be wondering, hey, how can I differentiate between the main video line and the BFCP video line? If you see the content/slides, that means that is your BFCP video stream. So there is another channel. So bear in mind that in the STP you will see that when an endpoint actually starts negotiating that channel between another BFCP capable endpoint. Some of the things that you have to understand: BFCP is supported on early offer. We introduced an early offer on 8.6 call manager, so there is no bindage of saying that hey, it's only on EO, it's only on DO. So it's supported on both the EO and DO SIP trunks. UCM never terminates a BFCP protocol. UDP/BFCP, that's the industry preferred standard. There is TCP BFCP as well, which we don't support that. So I want to just go into the case study so that you will understand. Okay, let's see how this really shows up in the STP, and I want to clearly know what is that video M line, what is that M line for the BFCP. So I've taken a case which clearly can help you understand. A case study is I'm trying to make a video call from a EX90 to a C20, and I'm not able to view a presentation on a C20. And you say, let me collect the logs from the VCS, and you collect the SDI logs, and you also collect the sniffer trace. How do you actually debug this trace for the presentation? Because the presentation is the one that's not coming here. So the initial invite from the EX90, it goes to the UCM, and you can see that the endpoint is saying, hey, I can do UDP/BFCP, and it's already said in this application video M line. So what's really happening? Is UCM not doing anything about it? So if you see the UCM that is sending out the invite from UCM to the VCS, you can see the whole BFCP line is missing. There is only a video M line. There's a content main, but there is no video M line. So what really happened? So let's see. So there are two things that happened in my setup. One is in 8.6 and higher. We have given a separate a checkbox under the SIP profile that says allow presentation share using BFCP. And I didn't have that checked in, and that particular SIP profile that went under the SIP trunk didn't have this option allow presentation sharing using BFCP, and that's why UCM never it actually chopped off that BFCP line. The other reason could also be, if you see in a BFCP, the flow control not negotiating, and the server, and sometimes there is a glare condition that happens. It's typically, I haven't come across, is a server and control exhibiting the same behavior. That means there is a clash. Somebody is not agreeing that there needs one can be a client or one can be a server. So if both are acting as a server, then there will be a problem for negotiating the BFCP. So that could be another cause as well. So make sure that you have that enabled on the SIP profile that goes under the SIP trunk. Okay, so if you see my SIP trunk here, I had a standard SIP profile with a BFCP disabled, and I had the same SIP profile under the SIP trunk. Maybe you have a question. Okay, I took care of on the UCM. I have checked that allow presentation. What can I do to see there is nothing going wrong with on the VCS side? VCS, if you know about the VCS, there is a place where you can set the default communication manager profile. When you set the SIP UDP/BFCP, the filter gets on. Like if you select the default profile, the filter is always on. So ensure that filter is off. Actually, see if you see this particular sniffer trace, when it is on, VCS does a TCP/BFCP, which is not supported by UCM that I already told, and it's not a preferred industry choice. So ensure that you have that filter off when you set the default communication manager profile. If you don't, look at this, the response that's coming from the VCS. Okay, so how does a custom profile look? So make a custom profile under your zone, under the VCS. So you can give it the custom profile here, and see here there is a SIP UDP/BFCP filter mode. Set it to off, and that would also alleviate some of your presentation sharing issues. So let's see after enabling. So I enabled the presentation share on my SIP profile, on my SIP trunk, and I just want to see how the UCM actually responds. So if you look at the UCM now, the response to the VCS, you can see that there is an application line that gets embedded in the STP. And you will not see the presentation issues because the UCM is sending on the UDP. The M line, on the video M line, that is the content slides, and you'll be able to see the presentation on the C20. So this particular case, there can be many more reasons. This particular case, I wanted you to see what exactly happens in the STP at the STP level. Okay, so we also added a parameter in the call manager, and it's about BFCP and security. So how it is because some of the organizations like a DoD or a federal, they might think of how does it really play out in the secure environments, and how does the BFCP line how does the whole call security actually gets displayed when there is a BFCP line. So we added a line, it's in the cluster-wide parameters. In the call manager, it says ignore BFCP line encryption status when designating a call security status. So if it is set to true, it's normally defaults to true. So you want to know what all the permutations and combinations of the negotiated STP, and if you set the service parameter to true or false, what would be the UCM actually decide on the security status of the call. So you can see, I'll just go through just one. Audio is secure, so audio channel is secure. You got a main video is secure. You got a presentation video to be a secure, and you have a BFCP application to be non-secure. In this mode, if the service parameter is set to false, that means you're that means you consider that the BFCP line. That means you're giving a priority for the BFCP line. That means a fall. So if you really consider that, that means it's non-secure. The security status of the whole call will be treated as a non-secure. I just took the third case because I want you to understand what that really the true is. It's sort of a flip. It's not like a direct correlation. If you put a true, you'll have a security status. It's you have to understand that. That's why we have ignore BFCP. But here you're taking into consideration, and that's why when you take into consideration, the whole security status will fall into non-secure. You might have questions on what are the other endpoints that it supports. So we made a we went entire SIP line device, SIP trunk, all the endpoints, the MCU which supports BFCP receive, which supports BFCP transmit. So you should be pretty much aware of when you don't see any UDP channel or a BFCP, then you should understand that it does not support this capability. One of the good things that VCS does is normally in UCM, there is no way of, if there is a 3-to-3 endpoint, and if you want to do a BFCP conversion, the UCM does not do a H329 to BFCP. But in those cases, I would highly recommend that you use a VCS as a proxy, because VCS, when it registers to the VCS as a 3-to-3 endpoints, it can actually do 329 to BFCP conversion. So that's one of the very good advantage of using a VCS as a proxy mode. BFCP to BFCP, I think UCM also does that, and the VCS also does that. So there is no problem with that. So that was the previous the BFCP. So if you have any questions, also please feel free to ask at the end of the session. Now let's go into the very important topic. This is native interoperability. Some of you folks might already be well aware of this. Native interop is something the CTS endpoint, when they call a typical 9971 or an EX90 of the VCS, normally we would actually funnel this call via some of the transcoder, like an MXC, if you have in your environment, MXC, because it has to do upscaling and downscaling of a video to present in the format that the other endpoint can actually display. So the call used to come to UCM, and then we have a SIP trunk going to the MXC and back to the EX90. So this was adopted things. But with CTS 174 version and higher, we removed that limitation. We don't want that any of the point-to-point call to traverse to the MXC and then to another endpoint. With the 8.5 version, the CTS now supports unrestricted media and handles variable frame rate and the timestamp. So we brought that capability the 174, and you don't have to go via the MXC. So you can have a point-to-point call directly from CTS to 100 to E20, 9971 CS, EX90 or EX90 off of VCS. So that's the advantage that we have, that rolling into the higher versions of 174. So how do you really decide whether it's an MUX call or it's an interop call? That means how do you know that it's a native interop? So earlier, if you take the sysop logs from the CTS, so the way you do it, you get into the HTTP interface, or you can get into the CTS via the admin and password, and you can grep for the sysop logs, and in the sysop logs, you can pretty much say whether it's a native call or a non-native call by identifying this endpoint. So it clearly tells in the logs endpoint used protocol MUX version 7 for this call. So this is a non-native interop call. As against to using a 174 version, you will see that the endpoint is saying CTS is an interop call and is not using a tip or the MUX. So that's what you have to you can get to know from the sysop logs whether it's doing a native call or a non-native call. The another thing I just wanted to, because since it's not there in the web interface, most of the customers are asking, how do you determine actually the resolution from the CTS? If you SSH into the CTS codec, there is a place that you can get what's the image size and resolution the CTS is doing. So get into the CTS and you do a CMA stat and a grep state, you'll get these logs. And there is a particular parameters you need to pay attention called sync and source. Sync means it's a receiver, source means it's an encoders. You can see this, what is the exact image resolution that the CTS is sending. So if it is on, that particular line says that state on is the image resolution that CTS is actually sending. So some of the good things. Some of the folks might be interested in, hey, I want to know what happens, what's the resolution, what's the signaling, and what's the media when some of these endpoints call, when CTS calls to this endpoint. So you can take a look at this, what's the resolution that you are expected, and it's pretty much like a handy note for you guys. What's the resolution it happens for a point-to-point video call. So I'll not go through that. The other thing is most of the enterprise have a constraint on the bandwidth. So the constraint of the bandwidth is how does the bitrate actually really affect the resolution? In the call manager, the resolution, if it is 1920, if you expect like a really like 1080p call, you should make sure that you have a bitrate at least more than 3 meg. So if you constrain the bandwidth on the call manager, it pretty much boils down to the resolution that's shown in the table here. If your bandwidth is less than 100 kbps, your resolution can be like 352 into 288, and appropriately when you increase the bitrate or region bandwidth from your call manager, the resolution kind of adapts to the resolution that's shown in the table. So folks might have a question, hey, I really want to know how I can achieve this particular resolution. What's the bitrate I need to have? So this is the bitrate that it's recommended to have. The another thing on the call manager, you have on the device page, you have an option where you can set the codec to do a maximum display. If you go under a CTS device page, there is a quality per display. You can set it to like I want to do an 1080p call, 720, so some of the folks, it defaults to highest detail, 720p, and if you want to toggle between them, so make sure that you go into the call manager page and adjust this. Otherwise, you'll be wasting a lot of time troubleshooting why you're not getting a 1080p call. So this is one of the catch point there. So my last thing is I wanted to give some exposure to how this MCU actually is playing in the UCM deployments. MCU is kind of a typical our go-to conferencing solution, and it's on-demand conferencing that typically we have been recommending the customers to use that in ad hoc mode. So want to give a heads up of how this is integrated. So you go to the UCM page and you pretty much add an MCU as a conference bridge. So it does two connections. One is HTTP and one is a SIP interface. So it's underlining it's actually a SIP trunk that's created. When you register MCU as a conference bridge, it's actually a SIP trunk that gets established. So it's not visible to you. That's how it gets registered back to the call manager. I'll go into some of the details of troubleshooting the conference resources. So how do we add to the call manager? There is an option that we said in the conference bridge name called Cisco TelePresence MCU. this is the option that you need to choose when you add the Codian, not the homogeneous or the heterogeneous. I have a slide just to reference to. There is a case study in the appendix that I'll not be going over today, which deals with how do you add a heterogeneous and homogeneous. Please feel free to go and refer to that. So when you add that MCU, how does it register? It registers just like any other IP endpoint, like it will have an IP, and make sure that you have the HTTP interface info is the logging mechanism you normally adopt to how you log into the web interface of MCU. Make sure that it matches here, otherwise you'll have a problem. The call manager API talking to the MCU API. MCU is registered, the HTTP. So you said, oh, I added to the MCU to the call manager. Now, how I can really access it from my endpoint? So for you to access from the endpoint, you need to ensure that MCU is added under the MRG, that's a media resource group, and then it should be actually rolled onto the MRGL. That's how you access that MCU from your phone. So in this phone, this is a 9951 phone, I added a media resource group list. This is an MCU that I recently registered. And how do you invoke it? When you do a point-to-point, when you do a call to the endpoint, you go and click on the conference button on 9951, and it invokes the MCU on the fly. If you don't have this set in the media group, so you'll not be able to have a three-party video conference. So you might be having a question, hey, is there something that I should be able to do on the MCU side config? Yeah, there are some couple of things that you need to ensure on the media. So do a HTTP interface to the MCU. There is a media port reservation. Ensure that it's in enabled state. Normally I've seen that it's in a disabled state, and you'll have a problem for the UCM to create a reservation. So ensure that it's in enabled state. And there is under the settings in the MCU, there is a place where it says incoming call for unknown conference or auto attendance. Ensure that it's in the disconnect caller. Normally, it actually defaults to default auto attendant. We don't want to go to the default auto attendant. We want UCM to do that port reservation. So this is disconnect caller is some that you have to choose here. And also, don't configure any pin, because you want this conference bridge to be ad hoc, right? So because on the fly, you have to have a three-party conference. So ensure that there is no pin. Never configure a pin option is selected. The next thing is, how do you actually troubleshoot a MCU? Whether it's registered. We added a parameter under, if you go to the RTMT, if you go to the call manager, if you go to the device search, and if you go to the cluster, there is an option called media resources. If you click on the media resources, it says that your MCU is registered. So you don't have to log into your web interface to see what's going on with the MCU. Suppose the three-party conference is failed, you have a way to actually monitor that via the RTMT as well. So it says here it's registered. If it's not registered, I think you'll pretty much know it's a unregistered. It shows up as an unregistered status. So some of the common things that you have to keep in mind when you are troubleshooting this registration issue: verify that MCU address is correct. That means make sure that IP of that MCU is properly configured in the UCM. The SIP port incoming and outgoing are matched on the MCU. And obviously the MCU is online. And it's configured for SIP. And also another way that I also referenced is checking an options ping. Normally a call manager will send an options ping, and there will be a reply back as a 200. Okay, that's way you can also check that MCU status is online. So I've already told that the underlining is a SIP trunk that it communicates. So this is one of the way that you can also correlate how we handle the SIP trunk failure. So you can pretty much use the same methodologies to troubleshoot the MCU registration issue. So we have come to an end of troubleshooting here, but because of our time constraint, I had to do only some of the top case studies. So what we learned today, we learned about UCM, VCS SIP trunk failure. We learned about session layer bandwidth attributes. We learned what BFCP. We learned native interoperability. We learned MCU video port allocation, how the MCU is registered to the call manager. And I believe we are pretty much in good shape to go and troubleshoot some of these integration issues. But again, it's not the whole 9 yards of troubleshooting, but at least you should give some hints where to actually look into STI and STL traces. Additional resources, you can always go to the Cisco support community. We have a deployment guide. We have a configuration document here. Again, as I mentioned in appendix, there are a lot of really good case studies and also call flows between a skinny SIP and a 3-to-3, how the real messages the message flow across these endpoints. So please feel free to refer those appendix, and meanwhile you can ask any questions on the Ask the Expert wiki. So that ends my session. So Monica or Dan?
Okay, thank you, Mahesh. Excellent presentation. And so we're going to begin the next segment of our webcast with our trivia question. How are Cisco TelePresence solutions, the National Hockey League, and the National Basketball Association making history? Is it A, Cisco partners with the NHL but not the NBA to deliver enhanced experience to its fans? Is it B, Cisco teams with both NHL and NBA to deliver enhanced experience to its fans? Or is it C, Cisco partners with the NBA but not with the NHL to deliver enhanced experience to its fans? Take a moment to answer, and we will reveal the correct answer later after we finish the Q&A section. Don't forget, at the end of this webcast, you will see a survey pop up. Please do fill that out. Everyone who does will be entered in a raffle to win a $50 Amazon gift card. We definitely want to hear your feedback from today, so just take a moment and do fill that out. And just so everyone knows, Mahesh will be participating in the Ask the Expert sessions in the Cisco support community from the 28th to December 7th. So please, if you have a question or you want some more elaboration on one of the topics that he covered today, you can always jump into the forum and he will be answering questions in there. And we have a couple of upcoming webcasts. Let me just run through these really quick. We have one coming up in English on December 18th. It's Tuesday, and that will be multicast on Cisco wireless LAN controllers. We have one on January 15th. That's Cisco Get VPN. And we're going to come back and finish these just after we get through the Q&A. So let's start with our first Q&A question. There was a case mentioned on the payload mismatch. How would that, in that scenario, how was the payload mismatch? How was that fixed?
The payload was so if you look at the case study, we actually transitioned that 320. So we actually moved that endpoint back to the VCS, and when we had the call back going from Sony to the back to the 9971, it always actually negotiated on the 97. So the UCM, we didn't have a mid-call invite that was coming out from the UCM. We actually avoided that issue by moving that endpoint. So we pretty much had the media going on 97. So it was pretty much, we didn't have an UCM to add back on the 105. So we avoided that situation altogether.
Okay, excellent. Here's our next question. How can I monitor the bandwidth usage of UCM?
Yeah, so good question. So in the RTMT, there is so I don't have a way to actually demonstrate that, but if you go to the RTMT and if you go to the call manager, there is a way that you can, you actually add the counters based on which UCM device pool you have, and it pretty much shows the region bandwidth that's been set, so you can monitor via the RTMT counter. So that's how you monitor from the UCM standpoint. So there is a pretty good option in a UCM RTMT that you can monitor the bandwidth that's been, once it negotiates the bandwidth, that particular counter, for example, if you put a 384 and you already have calls going across to it, so you can pump in some X number of calls based on that region bandwidth. Once you actually exhaust, you will end up getting a busy tone or something, but you can go and see the counter and the available bandwidth. So there are number of parameters, like for example, you'll have a bandwidth used, bandwidth available, so the counters appropriately reflect for the number of calls that's going on the network.
Okay, excellent. Let's get to our next question. Is it best practice to connect the MCU to the CU-CM or VCS or both?
It actually depends on your, so for example, MCU is being typically used as a conferencing resource on the VCS. So if you have a VCS deployment, yeah, you have to have a multi-way conference, and your endpoints can actually join via the conference factory. But on the UCM side, we are actually providing the flexibility for the customer to actually use that MCU wherever it is. If you have a VCS deployment, then yeah, you'll have a MCU hanging off as a SIP trunk to the VCS. But we are providing the same flexibility onto the UCM as well, because we want to have a three-party ad hoc conference on the fly. So in that cases, you have to have an MCU on the call manager. So it's heavily driven by how much deployment you have. A lot of phones just on the UCM side, and your call flows and your usage is on UCM, and that's what you want to leverage. And I would recommend you to put an MCU on the UCM side rather than on the VCS.
Okay, great. Next question here. Who typically performs the real-time monitoring, sniffing, and logging demonstrated here? Is it the customer themselves or a third-party integrator? What is the recommended tool set or lab environment that's required for this? So the RTMT is something that typically we have leveraged in our lab setup. But obviously, if you're having an issue and you call attack, possibly they will be asking the entire snapshot of the STI and STL logs, and I will be very careful to run any of the STI, STL logs when you have during the typical weekdays, because of a number of calls that's going on your network. So avoid as much as running the real time. So there is an option in RTMT that you can run a real time, getting a trace from RTMT, but it's going to dump a lot of trace, and it's going to be very very bulky. So see whether if you can get the trace off of a peak period. And there are a lot of tools out that you would be able to get it from. Get the packet capture, but typically in our lab environment, we often use a lot of times a packet capture or a Wireshark to get all of the traces. I don't know if it answers that question, but feel free to also ask me on the Ask the Expert. Maybe I'll clear your confusion. Okay, excellent. Next question here. Can the TMS be used for scheduling conferences on the MCU registered on the CU-CM without the use of the VCS?
So MCU, yeah, that's a good question. TMS is still we haven't there is no official support for to schedule the conferences if the MCU is off of UCM. We are using the TMS heavily on the MCU that's registered to the VCS as of now. But we do have that requirement in the roadmap, and possibly you will hear something from Cisco very soon.
Okay, excellent. How will activating debug, how will that affect performance?
Yes. That's all. It all depends upon your number of call flows. So I would really not recommend that in an enterprise setup that you extract the logs. It all depends upon how much call volume. It can significantly decrease your performance quality and also the call processing capabilities. So make sure that you don't run in the peak hours, but make sure that you execute in like off-peak hours or something where the call traffic is really low. But getting the logs will have a significant impact on the processing capabilities as well.
Okay, let's go to another question here. This one is about desktop sharing. Is this possible without the VCS and the MCU?
Yeah. Can you repeat, Dan? Is it possible? Did you ask?
Yes, is it possible?
Yeah. So if you have an MCU in the picture, yeah, you should be able to do a BFCP.
Okay. Here's another question on multi-party conferencing. What is required to make multi-party conferencing possible using Cisco Jabber and CTS?
So that's not in the scope right now, but I will answer it offline. There are some I am actually deferring afterwards because the question is about the Jabber endpoint. So I'll get back on that.
Okay,
or
no problem.
If Alan or Viraj or somebody has any thoughts on that.
Okay. Let's go to another question here. Yeah, they can.
They can answer the question.
Yeah, they can answer it offline. They have access to it.
Oh, okay, great.
They can respond to it directly. No problem. Here's a question. What is native interop with CTS?
Yeah, so native interop is something typically we have in the earlier deployment, before 1.7.4 version of a CTS version, we had to actually, for example, a CTS calling another 9971, we had to actually send the call to the MXE. MXE is the media engine that from a Cisco, you can deploy like 5600 or any of the MXE series. You have to send the call first to the MXE and MXE back to the UCM, and then UCM will actually send the signaling to the other side. So that's how we typically used to call between CTS and the lower endpoints like a 9971, like a smaller video endpoints. But now with a native interop, that capability has been that capability is pretty much, it's not restricted. Like you can make a point-to-point count between a CTS to 9971 instead of traversing the call via the MXE. So that that methodology that we call it as native interop.
Okay. There's another question. Can UCM be integrated with H.225 trunks?
Can you repeat, Dan?
Sure. Can the UCM be integrated with H.225 trunks?
H.225 trunks to what? To you mean the VCS? Or
it only mentions the UCM. Maybe it's
We don't recommend. If the question was 2 to 5 trunk to the VCS, no, it's not. But 2 to 5 trunk it's been a legacy that it's been supported like really years back, like a 2 to 5 trunk from the gatekeeper to the UCM. Yeah, that's been there for a while. But 2 to 5 trunk back to the VCS, no, we don't support that.
Okay. Here's another question. How does video security show in the video call?
Good question. So we have made some enhancements in 9.0 Call Manager, and if you see on a EX90, if we take for example, if there is a call security, I think it will show the lock icon on the right-hand bottom corner of your EX90 screen. That's how you determine the call status to be secure. And not only from the display, but if you get into the logs, you can actually see that there is a crypto line that's been added to the STP. So if you go to the person who asked the question, if you go to my appendix, there is a case study which deals with encryption between a CTS and a EX90 registered to the VCS. So that particular case study actually has an STP snapshot of how you can determine the security of that call state directly from the STP as well. You can pretty much instantly make out from STP if you have a crypto key in the video in the M line in the STP. You can pretty much know that it's a secure audio, and there will be a crypto key under the video M line. That means it is a encrypted video. So there's a good case study in the appendix, so please refer to that.
Excellent. And you can get to those slides just by downloading the...
Exactly, yeah. So if you... exactly. So I just wanted to show that in the same session that I'm actually... If you go to slide number 104 in the slides that I have posted, it says configuring security between UCM and VCS. Yeah, that's the one. So you can actually see the diagnostics log if you move there. I pretty much said, well, how do you actually configure it, and how do you determine from the UCM traces. So that particular slides will be very relevant.
Excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of good information here in these appendix slides, so be sure to review those as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up for our Q&A section today.
Okay, great.
Thanks to everyone who posted those questions. And just want to finish up our housekeeping on the upcoming events. We have a few English Ask the Expert events coming up, one based around data center and cloud security, another one on Cisco Unified Border Elements. Keep an eye out for those. We have another event coming up December 4th. That's Cisco PAT 6500 series troubleshooting and best practices. Another event, this one will be in Portuguese. This will be on December 6th, on Thursday. Troubleshooting issues on session initiation protocol. And be sure to check out the Cisco support community in all its many social media forums, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google+. They participate in all of them, so please do take a moment to check those out, as well as our many other languages in Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Polish, or Russian. Those Ask the Expert events take place in all those languages, as well as English. And today, finally, we're getting to our trivia answer.
Okay. Today's
correct answer is B. Cisco teams with both the NHL and the NBA to deliver an enhanced experience to its fans. I want to thank everyone for their time today. Thank you to Mahesh, our expert speaker, and to our question managers. And thank you, of course, to our audience for joining and participating in today's webcast. We'll see you all very soon.